ABSL Summit. Beyond Tomorrow. Building a Sustainable Future.
Before we start the panel session, it's time for a very important moment. As a host of many such events, I know that they would not be possible without the support of partners. And it is thanks to them that such a big events like ours are possible. We thank you for your trust and support. And let me introduce you. I have a great pleasure to greet those who are with us. And let's give him a warm, huge applause for their support. Main partners: Invest in Pomerania, Office of the Marshal of Pomorskie Voivodeship, Pomerania Development Agency, City of Gdańsk, City of Gdynia, City of Sopot, Gdańsk Economic Development Foundation, ABSL Strategic Partners, the Adecco Group, Colliers, Platinum Partners, Skanska, Gold Partners, JLL, PHN, Vastin, Silver Partners, BAT, Cushman & Wakefield, Taurus, and partners, ABB, Aztec, Balma, Buma Group, Cavatina, CFA Society Poland, Ewobus Polska, EY Academy of Business, Fujitsu, Genpack, Kinarps Polska, Longevity Center, NatWest Group, Polish Investment and Trade Agency, SAP, SAS, Scheffler, Shell, TELUS International, Expertise Partners, AICPA and CIMA, the Hackett Institute, Mercer, Diversity and Inclusion Partners, NatWest Group, Standard Chartered, Regional Partners, Bydgoska Agencja Rozwoju Regionalnego, Kujawy Pomorze, City of Toruń, Agencja Rozwoju Metropolii Szczecińskiej, Invest in Szczecin, Main City Partners, City of Katowice, City of the capital city of Warsaw, City of Krakow, City of Rybnik, City of Tarnów, Supporting City Partners, City of Łódź, City of Poznań, Welcome Cocktail Partner, Olivia Business Center, ABSL Party Partners, Cushman & Wakefield, Vastint, and Safety Partner, GINME, Medical Response Partner, Falk, and last but not least, Media Partners, Forbes Women, Personal Plus, Warsaw Business Journal, and Business Insider Polska. A huge applause for all of them. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Yeah, the moment has come when a very important question will be asked on the stage, ladies and gentlemen. The title of the panel is Clash of the Titans. Are you ready for a stakeholders capitalism? What does it mean? What is stakeholder capitalism for our panelists? Is it good for our economy? Our stage is now ready to play the first song of our concert. So the conductor will be Mateusz Szczurek, Associate Director and Regional Lead Economist, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Welcome. And let me introduce his musicians. Brunon Bartkiewicz, CEO ING Bank Śląski. Markus Heinz, Resident Representative for Poland and the Baltic States, the World Bank. Prince Michael of Liechtenstein, Geopolitical Intelligence Services, founder and CEO, board member, Longevity Center. Barbara Nowacka, member of Polish Parliament. And Katarzyna Zawodna-Bijoch, President and CEO, Skanska Office Business and CE. The stage is yours.
In Skanska, we build for a better society. We care for the lives of people and the environment. We take pride in high quality and innovation. Future-proof is a mark of our investments. Trends come and go, and style evolves. Future-proof is a symbol which describes the timelessness of our projects and defines the focus areas that make Skanska a trustworthy partner. We want to turn our customers' vision into reality.
Well, thank you very much for this wonderful introduction. We have 55 minutes, and some of us even less so, because I'm hearing that the important parliamentary work will call our a member of the parliament back to her committee. So I apologize in advance for Barbara Nowacka's departure slightly earlier. I think it would be good, before we start talking about shareholders' capitalism, to do a very quick tour de table or tour de stage, where our honorable speakers would tell what does it mean for them, who are the stakeholders, what is capitalism, and of course there is quite a few of us, so I would encourage you to talk about the most important thing that you believe needs to be said about this expression. Maybe it's obvious that capitalism is stakeholders capitalism, or maybe there is a contradiction hidden there that we need to deal with. So let's start from my left hand side, and Barbara Nowacka, could you please start?
First of all, thank you very much for having me here. It's a great pleasure to be both in Gdańsk in such an honorable company of people with vision and will to invest. And thank you for this fascinating debate. I'm really looking forward to hear different views on what is stakeholders capitalism, as it is now a concept. It is not implemented yet. We have rather a vague idea how it really would work. Many doubts, many of course trust, especially coming from the side of different stakeholders than the owners and the capital. Having in mind, for example, workers and employees, for them it might be a great change of perspective. Governments and institutions that are promised to be an important key player for main companies, not necessarily those who would enforce laws. Although I strongly believe that that will be a very important thing for government to play an important role in creating policies to keep capitalism, stakeholder capitalism, as it was dreamt by its leaders and inventors. But from my perspective, it's a great opportunity for the labor market that is in crisis. And after pandemic especially, in many companies, but also in government, in society, people realized how important is human work, how important are people in our companies, in our environment. Whereas for many years they were just treated as those who would bring benefits to company. Now they are in the center and in the focus of employers, which, as it would work, would be a fascinating change in capitalism. Capitalism that was very often controversial and contradictory to employees.
Thank you very much. So, stakeholders that we need to care a bit more about, and we're still not quite there, are the workers. Is the labor market is the part of the stakeholders capitalism that needs more attention. That will be
exactly humans in the center.
Markus.
What an entry.
That's quite an entry.
Thank you. Well, first, thank you for welcoming me to Gdansk. If you believe it or not, it's the first time in 40 years that I've been here. And I remember it as beautiful then, and it's even more beautiful now. So it's a great to be here with you today. On stakeholder capitalism. Now, this is a term that we in the World Bank actually do not use very much. But if you think about it, the World Bank Group is actually a very good example of what a stakeholder capitalist corporation should represent. So first, we're a bank, and there are not many institutions that are more capitalist than that. We also have shareholders. These are states for sure. And you cannot buy World Bank stocks on the stock market, but our shareholders watch our bottom line and our credit rating very carefully. At the same time, they insist that we focus on other interests than generating a profit. Our development committee, made up of the most influential finance and development ministers, they have endorsed an approach for green, resilient, and inclusive development. And this is what we aim for. And we open our ears to all stakeholders who can play a role in it. Local communities, the media, NGOs, and the business community. So this view of stakeholder capitalism governs our own activities, but it also extends to our engagement with the private sector. When our private sector arm, the IFC, was created, that was back in the 50s, the founders thought long and hard about what should guide investments into firms. Should it only be profitability of the venture, or should it be something more? And the answer from the get-go was yes. Any IFC investment should generate a profit, but in addition, it must also contribute to the economy as a whole. So they came up with the economic rate of return as an instrument to assess whether or not IFC funds should be made available to a private venture. And this is maybe one of the key issues to address when assessing whether we are ready for stakeholder capitalism or not. Can you measure what you're aiming for? And do you have a clear idea of priority ranking between competing interests? I believe international financial institutions such as the EBRD or the World Bank, they have already provided many ways of making the invisible hand visible. This can help guide our expectations for firms. And in any case, ready or not for stakeholder capitalism, the environmental and social threats that are facing us today require an all-hands-on-deck approach, and the private sector cannot be absent from that.
So if I were to summarize this, it would be, first of all, stakeholders as agents of change towards development, and secondly, in order to operationalize stakeholders' capitalism, you need science. You need a method of measuring what you're actually aiming at how much you're achieving it, because otherwise it will be quite difficult to do so. And I can add from my side that at EBRD, where I work for, we have this transition concept and transition impact, which is on the scale to 100. And there is a very complicated method of achieving the 6 qualities of transition that includes inclusion, resilience, good governance, and so forth. So I think we'll come back to this in a second. That stakeholders' capitalism cannot stay too fuzzy if it's to be implemented into the way capitalism works. I guess that would be. Is that a good?
Yes.
Katarzyna Zawodna-Bijoch, what about your take?
Yes, so it's a very broad topic, but for me, summing it up in like a very short sentence, it's a profit with purpose. It's an active collaboration of corporations, governments, and societies to together create more sustainable future. We are facing massive crises, and to tackle them, we need to collaborate. We need to implement innovative, collaborative, mission-oriented thinking in our ways of working, and we cannot do it alone. It can only be addressed if we collaborate. Solidarity we've heard today. Solidarity, collaboration, that's what is needed to create a real stakeholder capitalism. When we can address the issues starting with like COVID, going through the climate change, social inequities, that's not possible to address by single governments or by single companies. It requires collaboration. So we need to fundamentally restructure capitalism to make it innovative, inclusive, and sustainable. And to do that, we need to stop measuring ourselves only through the short-term financial goals. And of course, majority of us represents the business, and we are measured through the short-term financial goals. But it's not enough. If we want to create the resilient business, we need to create sustainable world around us. None of the company can succeed if we have unhealthy employees, unhealthy society in which we are working, that there is a threat towards the planet, that there is a fragmented society. To be successful in a long-term perspective, we need to contribute to the successful delivery to all the stakeholders that are creating the environment in which we are active. So it's absolutely fundamental to add to our short-term goals long-term ones, that we measure our organizations against environmental, social, government issues that are likely to touch our industries. So of course, then it will allow us to deliver on our short-term financial goals. And by definition, the ESG-oriented ones will create value in the longer-term perspective, allowing us to deliver successful profits for our shareholders in a long-term perspective. So that would be my definition. So it is a profit with purpose.
I don't think I'm needed to summarize this then. Brunon, Bartkiewicz, the financial sector, and that, like the Ministry of Finance, encompasses everything, or touches everything. So what's your take on stakeholders capitalism?
Good morning. First of all, I think that stakeholder capitalism as the term at the moment is the kind of fog which principally is hiding several issues which are behind that. First, it's the crisis that we are deeply in, namely the formula of short-term economic calculation of performance based on the only measurable part of the assets that or resources that we are using is just collapsing. Of course, if something is collapsing in such a social agreement, we have to find a scapegoat, and we are finding the scapegoat in the form of enterprises who are working without taking into account any other interest but the interest of short-term profit. Namely, that we are mixing the result of our action with the purpose of our action, as you rightly stated. So I think that this is the way of hiding the real problem. The real problem is that we are not including in the calculation that all the resources, and we are short-sighted. And short-sighted is in conflict with longer-term perspective of our business. However, capitalism as such is not existing. Capitalism as shareholders' capitalism also doesn't exist in the pure form. That's not true. There are more people to take responsibility in that manner, and what we should be talking is about changing the agreement, social agreement. The fact that we are talking about it at the moment is the fact that we are just entering into the age that there will be a regulation introducing through ESG, CSR, and related manner, the responsibility of multiple units. And will it work or not, we will see, of course. However, we are trying to introduce into the puzzle, and we are trying to introduce already for 10 years, but we are not effective. So the crisis is increasing in that manner. Cost of free or clean air, cost of waste, cost of water is not fully included in our structure. We only are starting to see that. And if we are looking at the fact what we are discussing at the moment, we are discussing not totally the right problems, but we are creating the terms which should lead us into a kind of debate and regulation. However, are we addressing the real issue? I am in quite a big doubt in that manner. However, I remain the optimist, and I think that we will solve all the problems, but we should perhaps get into the problem of solving them in the more decisive manner. We lost a lot of time. I was trying to find in Wikipedia or in Google, when is the time that we were talking about stakeholder value. In the literature, I found the dates 55, 57, 58, doesn't matter. I'm being from the school of Mr. Schumpeter, I can tell you that the term stakeholder value, and including other factors, maybe not in such an advanced way as we are discussing now, was appearing already more than 100 years ago. What did we do about that? The issue that we are now in the crisis is predominantly the fact of our lack of proper reaction, lack of dealing with consequences rather with results, and lack of decision taking. But the time is ticking, as we can see in here. Thank you.
Ruthless. So the three elements that did strike me. One was short-termism again. The second is pricing, proper pricing proper accounting for proper costs of what we're doing that might not be included today. And something that was only mentioned is that shareholders' capitalism or stakeholder or any capitalism is not set in stone ideal. It's always a matter of a social agreement.
Mateusz, let me be very frank. When I'm seeing analysts and investors, I'm saying this: my organization is not for profit. Profit is the outcome. We are here for customers. When I'm talking to my people in the organization, I never use the phrase profit, and I never create the pride of organization of ING Bank Śląski through the profit we generated.
Well, Prince Michael von Liechtenstein.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me here, and also thank you for spoiling us in such a beautiful place, a beautiful town, and this place here is also very beautiful. Now, coming back, that was very interesting what was already said before, but maybe I can add a few little things quickly. I've been now more than 75% of my professional life, I've been an entrepreneur. And I see that the big issue is whether you think short-term or you think long-term. If you think long-term, then you have to see who are your stakeholders, whether it's employees, it's customers, it's the community, it's the environment, but also don't forget the shareholder. I think this is important because he takes the risk. And I like very much what you said before. Profit is the result. You need to be profitable because otherwise you can't survive. And it's also very immoral to have a zombie company. So it is very important to be profitable, but if you want to be a long-term useful business, you have to take care of everything around. And I don't like in this context the word capitalism, because it talks about capital. And it's not only that, you know, there is more. Well, I generally don't like isms, whether it's capitalism or socialism, etc. I think the only ism I like as an entrepreneur is pragmatism, which doesn't mean opportunism. But for me, it's very much long-term. And I remember it was about more than 20 years ago, I talked with a banker's friend of mine in Zurich. And she told me she had a discussion with a professor, and this was the time where there was the shareholders' value. You know, you tried to put up the stock price, you got bonus depending on the stock price, which was a very short-term view, very short-term thinking, also in the portfolio management, etc. And they said sustainability, which came up as a word then, is not compatible with shareholder values. And then I was thinking shortly about that, and I wrote an article which was then pretty much contested in Zurich, that I said shareholders' value and sustainability are a perfect match if you are thinking long-term. If you look at all these parts, it will be rewarding, and this is what you said then, the profit is the result.
I mean, this, I mean, this immediately brings to my mind a question. Is this choice of caring about the long term, is it an ethical, moral decision by the entrepreneur, or is it just good business that will reward such a decision taker, or will it reward it naturally, or do we need something special to get there? Because it's clearly it doesn't look like all the entrepreneurs look that way.
Well, I would say quite a few would look that way. Now, whether it's an ethical or other thing, I don't think that's so important. I think important is, and finally it's the result which counts. Important is that you achieve something, and I think most successful businesses started that way. Long-term successful businesses started that way. And it's also, if you want to remain successful, you have to adapt. Times are changing, requirements are changing. And I think one point which is important, and I don't know whether it's ethical or it is pragmatic or it's whatever, is loyalty. You need good employees, you have to be loyal to them, and they are loyal to you. The same goes to the clients. It also goes to the community. And I think loyalty you can probably discuss or see also as ethical.
A second. This is so that was the side of a single firm. Could I ask Markus now for the macro picture? Does this approach of I think a general picture of what stakeholder capitalism is, I think we managed to describe with various accents maybe, but does it work also for the economy as a whole? So can it be profitable from the point of view of the overall size of the pie, or is it something that we need to sacrifice in order to get a better result on other accounts? Are there any examples in the world of sort of good and bad practices that you could tell us?
Well, there's no simple answer to that, and certainly no simple yes or no answer to whether shareholder capitalism or stakeholder capitalism is better in that sense. I mean, if you look at the essence of shareholder capitalism, although it's a very undefined term in a way, the pursuit of a selfish goal, right? Adam Smith already said that actually is enough, to benefit the economy overall. So that was already in the 18th century. Now, if you take the 1980s up until the global financial crisis, sort of as sort of the heyday of what we think is sort of the shareholder capitalism period, Milton Friedman sort of made it popular in the 1970s, and then it was sort of the order of the day until then you will observe a rise in GDP, of course, right? We'll also see, for instance, if you look at the US, that poverty rates went down, right? But at the same time, you had a rise in inequality, very distinct rise in inequality. You had mounting environmental concerns, including climate change, and possibly the basis for the global financial crisis in this thinking. So a former World Bank chief economist, Joe Stiglitz, he claimed that his research actually showed, in a scientific way, that shareholder capitalism does not really benefit welfare taken broadly. Right? At the same time, if you look at companies that follow stakeholder capital principles, they're in danger of losing focus, right? And efficiency. There are many competing interests and sometimes conflicting goals between stakeholders. So this can turn companies into inefficient, process-oriented places that we know maybe best from the Dilbert cartoons, right? This is certainly not what you want, but those companies that do stakeholder capitalism right, in my view, do produce better results than corporations that simply follow the greed is good mantra. And lately there has, for instance, been some evidence that ESG-focused investment funds produce better returns than other companies that don't have that focus during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so what better expert witness to call than the markets themselves to say that stakeholder capitalism can work?
Could I ask Barbara Nowacka about the workers' side of the stakeholder capitalism? What's exactly missing? Maybe what's missing, not in the world. Maybe let's get a bit closer in Poland. Will be easier to answer. Are we there yet? Is there something that that the Parliament needs to do to get us closer to the ideal world where this is taken into account more fully? Is it so? I'm not asking what would you do if, because you're there in the Parliament, but what feature are we still lacking in the way capitalism works in Poland? In the world, in Europe. Let's make it like
well, it's good that we are focusing on Europe, because then it's much more easy to talk about labor code, workers' rights, etc. And of course, it's still living in the bubble, whereas we know how a labor market does look like in, for example, Asian countries, and same companies which are implementing here nice policies, are pro-environmental and are focusing on benefits of their employees, in Asia are not actually acting as properly and as clearly and as transparently and with the same approach. But if we talk about situation here in Europe, in Poland, and in many other countries, we, especially after COVID, as a society realize that one of the fundamentals of our being a society is the fundament of taking care of each other. The approach towards our neighbors, our society, sometimes also in company, the approach changed a lot, though law still is as it is. So, of course, there are firms, companies where employees are appreciated, are earning good salaries, but on the other hand, especially in companies that are not having those big and clear goals of stakeholder economy, of not benefiting immediately out of the work, we are lacking very often the regular procedures of labor code. So people are overwhelmed with work, are working not in a good conditions, sometimes also with this online work. What we faced, I think everyone faced, that we didn't work for 8 hours or 10 hours. Sometimes the work was permanent, 24 hours sometimes. We were, well, I'm talking as a member of parliament, our work is totally different. We are 24 hours in our job, but then I saw my friends, also my members of family, being 24 hours online, available and ready to respond. We had to share our regular home life, for example, with kids having their lessons, classes, with a family that needed to be cared with our work. And the question is how now, as a society and also as the lawmakers, we should target the question of being permanently at work. Which are the working hours? How we count working hours? who is benefiting of our free time? Do we have a free time? These are the big challenges. Second thing, what is our office? If we are working at home, is this our office? Who is paying for example, even for a computer we are working with? And then companies, of course, are benefiting because they don't need such huge buildings, care, etc. And these are the challenges, not only for Poland. These are the challenges for future labor market and for lawmakers all over the world, with the question how to deal with dynamic changes at the labor market, with online work, with lack of balance between home work, free time, and working life. But these are not the answers that only politicians can give. I think this is another thing when we talk about stakeholders capitalism, that these are the decisions that should be done together with companies, employees, and government.
So that would naturally bring us to Katarzyna Zawodna's. Of course, not all companies would benefit from not using office space. The Skanska office business might not necessarily be the best one to benefit from that. So what we had was sort of the old school, how about taking the labor code seriously? So that was one thing. And the second is that the old, the new regulations should take into account the new world. So do you have a view on what's missing? Are they hampering the way you would like to work and set up work in this new world? So let's do this stakeholder capitalism or stakeholder policy making here on stage. I mean,
yes, it's like a multidimensional topic, because nowadays in our part of the world we have a war for talent. To win the best talents, to bring our organizations to the upper level, to innovate, to create the technology, we want to have the best people. And the best people more and more represent the generations which are very demanding towards employers. So they do expect the companies they are working for, buying from, investing in, to represent the values beyond the short-term financial targets. So to win that talent, to have the people that are open to contribute to your business development, you need to create them an environment in which they can thrive and they can be at their best and they can feel that they can contribute. And that is to address the minimum, like the minimum, the labor code, as you've mentioned. But I don't think that working from home in a long-term perspective is creating the environment in which we feel that we belong, that there is a company culture that we can build on, that we can exercise on the values that the company is having. And what is the most important, it is very difficult to make people innovate and to make them being creative when they are working from home. So for that, we need to have a space which, of course, nowadays, first of all, need to address the safety issues. We need to feel safe. We need to feel that this environment is healthy for us. So this human-centric approach, which you've mentioned, is super important when we are creating the physical space for people. They need to feel that their well-being is well addressed, that the values that they want to have are represented by the company that they are working in. So it is super important. I think it's today must for a successful business delivery. We are human intense businesses, so it is super important who is doing the job. And to win that battle, we need to focus on values like safety, green, ethics, addressing community investment, diversity and inclusion, to creating the environment and people can like really be at their best. So that's the physical space. Those are the values that we are representing, and also the impact we are having on the world around us. companies that are pursuing ESG targets are demanding towards the partners, pushing them to work in more ethical way, to really comply with labor codes. So it is on us to raise the standards all over the place.
So what I understand is that, at least in some types of business and in the current labor market situation, which is, COVID aside, actually quite good in our region, labor code is the bare minimum that successful companies don't need to care about that much, because their standard needs to be much, much higher if they are to succeed by keeping their employees happy and the right types of employees that they aspire to. So that's, I would love for this to be true of all the firms and all the states of the macroeconomy, but maybe it is, and it's just, and the firms that are not doing this are just foolish, and they're doomed to not to succeed.
If we are discussing innovations, if we are discussing technology, if we are discussing knowledge-driven economy, there is no other way than to focus and take care of your employees. I can hardly imagine somebody that is unhealthy, demotivated, not seeing the vision of the organization they are working for, to be very creative, innovative, and eager to like go beyond the regular job to be done. So yeah, that I think is the base.
Could we switch now to the environment? Because it's been mentioned a number of times, environmental sustainability and stakeholders as the, well, world as a whole, our grandchildren, because this is where the stakeholders concept becomes maybe the widest once we start talking about the environment. ING, ING Bank Śląski has been, I mean, I watched with awe its transformation from a bank that was based traditionally in Lower Silesia into a very green bank. I mean, is this something that that is, okay, how much, since then we've seen others follow, and how much of that is, again, a strive for long-term success, and how much of a push or expected push from the regulatory environment? How much does that matter? Maybe we don't need the regulations at all, because this is just what's going to happen with the leaders starting, and others will just have to follow. Is the green transition the only logical path, almost regardless of the European or national regulations?
Well, I think that at the end of the day, the world is pretty much simple, though it looks very complex. Namely, within the framework, we are trying still to optimize the shareholders' value in long term, which means that profit is optimized in the long term. Optimizing profit in short term, it means we optimize the result, not the drivers, so that's a wrong economic decision. Namely, if we are having a longer term perspective, then we are using the interest of multiple choices or multiple stakeholders in that manner, and it started to work. The issue is that there are trends which require to introduce the change into the framework so that we operate a bit differently with more or less the same mechanism. We are using custom duties for hundreds of years, but we have not introduced the cost of using air or using or emission of CO2 until very recently. Why? the framework when we would be saying any import of fossil fuel, it's the custom duty, 300%, introduced under the crisis of 73, will change our world until now, in natural way. As we didn't do that, so we missed the framework, now we are in the situation that things are not happening. Why? Because we are in competition structure, namely, one player who is trying to play differently, so seeing the trend in a different way, is not changing the whole picture. Because CO2 is not the matter who is not emission CO2, but whether we can stop it together. So the symptoms that there will be, and obviously must be, because at the end of the day, the trend is what will happen in the future. We are having that power. The fact that we will have to introduce in economic calculation, the fact of CO2 emission, that coal will have to be eliminated from the thermal production was obvious for years. In 2015, ING have announced its declaration just clearly stating, dear customers of ours, we are warning you, CO2 will not remain in the thermal form. Nothing happened. Actually, it was a laughter on us. At the moment, it is obvious to everybody that CO2 is having that destiny. The issue is time again. 6 years, 10 years lost in the process of transformation, create the transformation, must be sharper and more drastic. Look at the European Union Fit for 55. What is happening? If we will take just the calendar of announcement and decision by the EU, we are seeing that two things are certain. The scale of transformation of energy is becoming shorter. The scale is becoming bigger and time is becoming shorter. Two factors, which means transformation, it's harder. The sooner we start working on transformation early enough, when things which will happen, not probability, it will happen, we have to take that into account. Back in 2015, we were saying, people who are producing bad technology, who are using bad technology, will be penalized in value chain, in vendor chain, in financing, and will be not economically sound. Now it's obvious that that is happening. But it's not the fact that ING was so smart in 2015. That was obvious for everybody. That was obvious for everybody. And then please look at the media and discussion in Europe and in our country. What happened between 2015 and 2021? I think it's extremely educational to just look how the trajectory of titles, approach, and attitude has changed within that time. Do we need the regulation in that respect? Yes, because they create the framework, they are creating the rules, the equal playing field for everybody, but it's unavoidable. And of course, the regulators will make mistake in that respect, no doubt. And they are starting to make it extremely complex. Yes, because time is too short. So if we have missed the time, then we have to act faster, and that will be sweat and tears. Hopefully not blood, but I will also not exclude that the climate approach and climate adjustment will also mean blood. Thank you.
I see
Unfortunately, I have to leave you. Thank you very much for having me here. But today we have a debate on new laws on education. And those who have kids, I guess you understand how important it is to debate with Minister Czarnek. It is also about our future and future of our kids. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So could I ask you about the the time lost. I mean, do you think this is? I mean, to me, it is indeed obvious that had we moved more towards environmental sustainability earlier, it would have been easier. I mean, first of all, do you agree? And secondly, if you do, then who was late?
Well, I think maybe two things. Basically, I agree with that. But I think there was already, and if we look at Europe, there was already a lot done in the past by business. So it doesn't mean that nothing was done. Secondly, yes, it's always better to start earlier, but sometimes also time has to be right for that. It changes not. I think also we can't put everything through regulations, limitations, etc. There's certainly necessary to put certain, let's say, continental or even some global frameworks, some continental frameworks, some regional frameworks, because issues are different in different areas. We need this framework, but I wouldn't overregulate it, because if we overregulate, we create unintended consequences of other parts. And I'm very much with you. This issues, they should have a price. Air should have a price. If you pollute the air with CO2, it would need a price. Water should have a price. There are different issues as we pay taxes for having that the community is creating our environment. So I agree this should have a price. As I also think there's another discussion, the data should have a price, personal data. And it would be much easier, we wouldn't need such a complicated GDPR if we would have a price on that. But there is one other thing, and if you allow me, can I get a bit demagogic? In my opinion,
by all means.
if we say that we need to have a price on all that, I don't see really, and I don't see a big danger if now in this sort of supranational government program by the European Union, trillions are put into a green economy, and at the same time, another important issue, money, the central banks give it without having a price. No interest rates, we are giving money for free at the moment. And I'm a bit afraid that might result in some crony capitalism of another dimension.
Well, the monetary policy, if we start discussing this in 6 minutes and 47 seconds that we left, I'm slightly worried that we will not find enough time for that.
That's why I'm a bit demagogic.
Right.
Sorry about that.
Could I mean, time is slowly running to an end. Could I ask you I mean, all of you, a question on COVID versus stakeholders capitalism? Or rather, so what, in your view, would be the best response in 2020 or early 2020 from the point of view of the things that we discussed today? Because there were lots of things and lots of policies being introduced. I mean, restrictions on movements, vaccines, obligatory vaccines, sponsored medicine, support for corporations. I mean, what do you think plays well with your desired concept of stakeholders capitalism, and what doesn't? We have 5 minutes, 20 seconds for the four of us, 5 of us.
I think what we need, and I think an advantage was, we need frequently a crisis, unfortunately, with all bad consequences. So I can't tell you anything clearly about that, but it brought certain problems on the surface, which we now have to deal with. it's workplace, it's efficiency, it's human working together, corporate structures, government structures, etc.
And interest rates.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, thank you. Brunon.
Well, first, pandemia is the suffering of the people. So from suffering of the people, I think we as the community, international community, I think we done pretty well. But pandemia is also this opportunity, or what we have learned from it, and dealing with the consequences what we have. So that's a more complex structure. And I think pandemia per se is only the short, and let me now be very controversial. Let me try to be very controversial in that respect. It's not as important factor in that whole structure, the stream aside. It's not as important. It's just the step in the whole development that we are seeing in the crisis of need for deep transformation, this huge tsunami that is happening for perhaps at least 30 years, that is happening in the very important, very useful lessons learned from that perspective.
That was controversial, I think.
I managed.
Being fast here, I think that the COVID is a very painful reminder showing us how interconnected we are, and that unless each and single one of us is well and safe, none of us is safe and should be comfortable, which is a clear signal that it's a call for action. We need to address all the social and environmental challenges right here, right now, together.
So we back to cooperation, collaboration, interconnectedness that we started the discussion with. Markus.
So I don't see the time anymore. Either we've run out, or but let me try to be brief. In November 2019, before COVID-19, I was at an Economist conference in Cyprus, and I gave a presentation, and the title of the presentation was, "Are we ready for the next shock?" Now, I didn't know anything about COVID yet, but the answer that I gave then was probably not, right? And the reason for that was that we, as the World Bank, looked at the state of institutions, especially in Southern European countries as compared to Northern European countries, and how they would deal with shocks. And pandemic was one of the possibilities. Now, I think the pandemic and the reaction has shown two things. One, that governments have learned from the global financial crisis. You cannot leave the problem to itself. You have to actually engage. And those countries that have institutions like German Kurzarbeit, for instance, right, that you can apply very quickly, fared probably a little bit better than others who didn't have that. So the very short answer for me is that we have to invest in institutions that really do support that kind of collaboration that we all talk about, and they are sort of the invisible fabric that makes stakeholder capitalism possible.
Well, thank you very much, and that is quite a fitting conclusion too. Thank you so much for the participation, and I think we only scratched the surface in some places, including monetary policy, and it would be great to continue it, if only for the coffee. I understand that there is little time for the questions and comments from the audience, but most of us will stay around, and you're more than welcome to catch us and challenge us on some of these things in the next minutes and hours. Well, thank you again.
resilience, maturity, talents, growth, innovation. The change made us stronger. This all made us sustainable. ABSL Summit. Beyond Tomorrow. Building a Sustainable Future.